Chapter 16. For a moment, I just lay on my bed, vaguely aware of my amazing, astonishing dream, so unlike any other dream. For the first time ever, I was conscious of all I had done. Nelida, I whispered as a soft, raspy murmuring, coming from the other end of the room, intruded on my reveries. I sat up only to lie back quickly as the room began to spin around me. I waited for a few moments, then tried again. I stood up and took a few hesitant steps. I collapsed on the floor and hit my head against the wall. Shit! I cried out when the room kept spinning around me. I'm fainting. Don't be so dramatic, Florinda said, then giggled as she saw my bewildered face. She touched first my forehead, then my neck, as if she were afraid I might be running a fever. You aren't fainting, she pronounced. You need to replenish your energy. Where is Nelida? Aren't you happy to see me? She took my arm and helped me back to the bed. You're faint with hunger. I'm not. I contradicted her, more out of a habit than conviction. Although I didn't feel hungry, I was certain my dizziness was caused by a lack of food. Except for breakfast, I hadn't eaten at all during the day. We wondered why you didn't, Florinda said, responding to my thoughts. We prepared such a delicious stew for you. When did you get here? I asked. I have been silently calling you for days. Closing her eyes, Florinda made a humming sound, as if the noise would help her remember. We have been here for several days, I think, she finally said. You think? I was completely taken aback, my temper getting the better of me. I quickly recovered. Why didn't you let me know that you were here? More than hurt, I was puzzled that I had failed to notice their presence. How could I have been so unaware? I mumbled, more to myself than to her. Florinda regarded me with a curious expression in her eyes. She seemed surprised by my bafflement. If we had let you know that we were here, you wouldn't have been able to concentrate on your work, she remarked, sagaciously. As you well know, instead of writing your paper, you would have been pending on our comings and goings. All your energy would have been spent in trying to find out what we do, wouldn't it? Her voice was low and raspy, and a strange, excited light made her eyes even more shiny than usual. It was a deliberate act on our part that you should work without distractions, she assured me. Then she went on to explain that the caretaker had helped me with my paper only after he was satisfied with what I had done so far. She claimed that in dreaming, he found the inherent order of my notes. I, too, saw the inherent order of my notes, I said smugly. I, too, saw it in a dream. Of course you did, Florinda readily agreed. We pulled you into dreaming so you could work on your paper. You pulled me into dreaming? I repeated. There was something startlingly normal about her statement. Yet at the same time, it made me feel apprehensive. I had an uncanny sense that I was finally close to understanding what dreaming awake was. But somehow I couldn't quite grasp it. In an effort to make sense, I told Florinda all that had happened from the moment I saw the caretaker and the dog in the yard. It was difficult to make it sound coherent, for I couldn't decide myself when I had been awake and when I had been dreaming. To my utter bewilderment, I could recall the exact outline of my paper as I had seen it superimposed on my original draft. My concentration was far too keen for me to have been dreaming, I pointed out. That's precisely what dreaming awake is, Florinda interrupted me. That's why you remember it so well. Her tone was that of an impatient teacher explaining a simple but fundamental point to a backward child. I've already told you that dreaming awake has nothing to do with falling asleep and having a dream. I took notes, I said, as if that would invalidate her statement. Seeing her nod, I asked her if I would find whatever I saw in dreaming awake, jotted down in my own handwriting on my pad. You will, she assured me. But before you do, you'll have to eat first. She rose and, holding out her hand, helped me to my feet. You put a semblance of order to my appearance. She tucked my shirt into my jeans and brushed off the pieces of straw sticking to my sweater. She held me at arm's length and regarded me critically. Not satisfied with the results, she began to fuss with my hair, tweaking the unruly strands this way and that. You look quite frightful with your hair striking out all over the place, she pronounced. I'm used to taking a hot shower upon awakening, I said, and followed her out into the corridor. Seeing that she was heading toward the kitchen, I told her that I had to go to the outhouse first. I'll walk with you. Noticing my displeased face, she added that she only wanted to make sure I didn't get dizzy and fall into the shithole. Actually, I was glad to hold on to her arm as we made our way to the yard. I almost fell as we stepped outside. Not so much from weakness as from the shock of seeing how late in the day it was. What's the matter? Florinda asked. Do you feel faint? I pointed up at the sky. A faint gleam was all that remained of the sun's light. I can't possibly have lost a day, I said. My voice had all but vanished even before I finished speaking. I struggled to assimilate the idea that indeed a whole night and the whole day had passed, but my mind would not accept it. Not being able to account for time measured in the usual manner unhinged me. Sorcerers break time's flux, Florinda answered my thoughts. Time, in the fashion we measure it, doesn't exist when one dreams the way sorcerers dream. Sorcerers stretch or compress time at will. For sorcerers, time is not a matter of minutes or hours or days, but an altogether different matter. When dreaming awake, our perceptual faculties are heightened. She proceeded in a patient, measured tone. However, when it comes to perceiving time, something altogether different happens. The perception of time does not become heightened, but is canceled out completely. She added that time is always a factor of consciousness. That is, to be aware of time is a psychological state that we automatically transform into physical measurements. It is so ingrained in us that we can hear, even when we are not consciously aware of it, a clock ticking inside us, subliminally keeping track of time. In dreaming awake, that capacity is absent, she emphasized. A thoroughly new, unfamiliar structure, which somehow is not to be understood or interpreted as we normally do with time, takes over. Then all I will ever consciously know about dreaming awake is that time has either been stretched or compressed, I said, trying to come to grips with her elucidation. You will understand a great deal more than that, she assured me emphatically. Once you become adept at entering heightened awareness, as Mariano Aureliano calls it, you'll be aware then of whatever you wish, because sorcerers are not involved in measuring time. They are involved in using it, in stretching, or compressing it at will. You mentioned earlier that you all helped me into dreaming, I said. Then some of you must know how long that state lasted. Florinda said that she and her companions were perennially in a state of dreaming awake, that it was precisely their joint effort that pulled me into dreaming awake, but that they never kept track of it. Are you implying that I might be dreaming awake now? I asked, knowing the answer before she responded. If I am, what did I do to reach this state? What steps did I take? The simplest steps imaginable, Florinda said. You didn't let yourself be your usual self. That is the key that opens doors. We have told you many times and in many ways that society is not at all what you think it is. To say that to stop yourself from being your usual self is sorcery's most complex secret sounds like idiocy, but it isn't. It is the key to power. Therefore, the most difficult thing a sorcerer does. And yet, it isn't something complex or impossible to understand. It doesn't boggle the mind. And for that reason, no one can even suspect its importance or take it seriously. Judging by the result of your latest dreaming awake, I can say that you have accumulated enough energy through preventing yourself from being your usual self. She patted my shoulder and turned away. I'll see you in the kitchen, she whispered. The kitchen door was ajar, but no sound came from the inside. Florinda, I whispered. A soft laughter answered my call, but I couldn't see anyone. As soon as my eyes became accustomed to the penumbra, I saw Florinda and Nelida sitting around the table. Their faces were unnaturally vivid in that tenuous light. Their same hair, their same eyes, their same noses and mouths gleamed as if lit by an inner light. It was the most eerie thing to see two beings so totally alike. You two are so beautiful that you're scary, I said, and stepped closer. The two women gazed at each other, as if to validate my statement, then burst into a most disturbing laughter. I felt a curious prickle running down my spine. Before I had a chance to comment on the odd sound, they stopped. Nelida beckoned me to sit on the empty chair beside her. I took a deep breath. I had to stay calm. I told myself as I sat down. There was a tenseness and a crispness about Nelida that unnerved me. She served me a plateful of a thick soup from the tureen standing in the middle of the table. I want you to eat everything, she said, pushing the butter and a basket with warm tortillas toward me. I was famished. I attacked my food as if I had not eaten for days. It tasted wonderful. I ate all there was in the tureen and washed down the buttered tortillas with 3 mugfuls of hot chocolate. Satiated, I slumped back in my chair. The door to the yard was wide open, and a cool breeze rearranged the shadows in the room. Twilight seemed to be lasting forever. The sky was still, streaked with heavy layers of color. Vermilion, deep blue, violet, and gold. And the air had that transparent quality that brought close the distant hills. As if propelled by some inner force, the night seemed to shoot out of the ground. The shadowed movements of the fruit trees in the wind, rhythmic and graceful, swept the darkness up into the sky. Esperanza burst then into the room and placed a lit oil lamp on the table. She regarded me with unblinking eyes, as if she had difficulty in focusing. She gave the impression that she was still concerned with some otherworldly mystery, that she wasn't yet quite there. Then slowly her eyes thawed, and she smiled as if she knew now that she had returned from a great distance. "My paper!" I cried out, upon discovering the loose sheets and my notepad under her arm. Grinning broadly, Esperanza handed me my notes. Eagerly, I examined the sheets and laughed out loud upon seeing the pages on the pad filled with precise and detailed instructions, written half in Spanish, half in English, on how to proceed with my term paper. The handwriting was unmistakably mine. "It's all there," I said excitedly. "That's how I saw it in my dream." The thought that I might be able to zoom through graduate school without having to work so hard made me forget all my former anxiety. "There are no shortcuts to writing good term papers," Esperanza said. "Not even with the aid of sorcery. You should know that without the preliminary reading, the note-taking, and the writing and rewriting, you would never have been able to recognize the structure and order of your term paper in dreaming." I nodded wordlessly. She had spoken with such an incontestable authority that I didn't know what to say. "What about the caretaker?" I finally managed to ask. "Was he a professor in his youth?" Nelida and Florinda turned to Esperanza, as if it were up to her to answer. "I wouldn't know this, I wouldn't know that," Esperanza said evasively. "Didn't he tell you that he's a sorcerer in love with ideas?" She was silent for a moment, then added softly, "When he is not taking care of our magical world, as befits a caretaker, he reads." "Besides reading books," Nelida elucidated, "he reads a most extraordinary number of scholarly journals. He speaks several languages, so he's quite up to date with the latest of everything. Delia and Clara are his assistants. He taught them to speak English and German." "Is the library in your house his?" I asked. "It belongs to all of us," Nelida said. "However, I'm sure he's the only one, beside Vicente, who has read every book on the shelves." Noticing my incredulous expression, she advised me that I shouldn't be fooled by appearances regarding the people in the sorcerer's world. To reach a degree of knowledge, sorcerers work twice as hard as normal people, she assured me. Sorcerers have to make sense of the everyday world as well as the magical world. To accomplish that, they have to be highly skilled and sophisticated, mentally as well as physically. She regarded me with narrowed, critical eyes, then chuckled softly. For 3 days, you worked on your paper, she explained. You worked very hard, didn't you? She waited for my assent, then added that, while dreaming awake, I worked on my term paper even harder than I did while awake. Not at all, I hastened to contradict her. It was all quite simple and effortless. I explained that all I did was see a new version of my paper superimposed on my old draft, and then I copied what I saw. To do that took all the strength you had, Nelida maintained. While dreaming awake, you channeled all your energy into a single purpose. All your concern and effort went into finishing your paper. Nothing else mattered to you at the moment. You had no other thoughts to interfere with your endeavor. Was the caretaker dreaming awake when he looked at my paper? I asked. Did I see what he saw? Nelida rose and walked slowly to the door. For a long moment she peered out into the darkness, then returned to the table. She whispered something to Esperanza, which I didn't hear, and then sat down again. Esperanza chuckled softly, then said that what the caretaker saw in my paper was different from what I saw and wrote down. Quite naturally so, for his knowledge is by far more vast than yours. Esperanza stared at me with her quick, dark eyes that somehow made the rest of her face seem lifeless. Guided by his suggestions, and according to your own capabilities, you saw what your paper ought to read like. That's what you wrote down. While dreaming awake, we have access to hidden resources, which we never use ordinarily, Nelida said, going on to explain that the instant I saw my paper, I remembered the clues the caretaker had given me. Noticing my incredulous expression, she reminded me what the caretaker had said about my paper. Too many footnotes, too many quotes, and sloppily developed ideas. Her eyes radiated sympathy and amusement as she went on to say that since I was dreaming and I am not as stupid as I pretended to be, I immediately saw all kinds of links and connections that I hadn't noticed before within my material. Nelida leaned toward me, a half smile playing over her lips as she waited for my reaction. It's time you know what made you see a better version of your original paper. Esperanza sat up straight and gave me a wink, as if to emphasize that she was about to reveal a major secret. When dreaming awake, we have access to direct knowledge. I could see the disappointment in her eyes as she regarded me for a long moment. Don't be so dense, Nelida snapped impatiently. Dreaming awake should have made you realize that you have, as all women do, a unique capacity to receive knowledge directly. Esperanza made a silencing gesture with her hand and said, Did you know that one of the basic differences between males and females is how they approach knowledge? I had no idea what she meant. Slowly and deliberately, She tore off a clean sheet from my notepad and drew 2 human figures. One head she crowned with a cone and said that it was a man. On the other head, she drew the same cone, but upside down, and said that it was a woman. Men build knowledge step by step, she explained, her pencil poised on the figure crowned with a cone. Men reach up. They climb toward knowledge. Sorcerers say that men cone toward the spirit. They cone up toward knowledge. This coning process limits men on how far they can reach. She retracted the cone on the first figure. As you can see, men can only reach a certain height. Their path toward knowledge ends up in a narrow point, the tip of the cone. She looked at me sharply. Pay attention, she warned me, and pointed her pencil to the second figure, the one with the inverted cone on its head. As you can see, the cone is upside down, open like a funnel. Women are able to open themselves directly to the source, or rather, the source reaches them directly in the broad base of the cone. Sorcerers say that women's connection to knowledge is expansive. On the other hand, men's connection is quite restricted. Men are close to the concrete, she proceeded, and aim at the abstract. Women are close to the abstract and yet try to indulge themselves with the concrete. Why are women, being so open to knowledge or the abstract, considered inferior? I interrupted her. Esperanza gazed at me with rapt fascination. She rose swiftly, stretched like a cat until all her joints cracked, then sat down again. That women are considered inferior, or, at the very best, that female traits are equated as complementary to the males, has to do with the manner in which males and females approach knowledge, she explained. Generally speaking, women are more interested in power over themselves than over others, a power which is clearly what males want. Even among sorcerers, Nelita interjected, and the women all laughed. Esperanza went on to say that she believed that originally women saw no need to exploit their facility to link themselves broadly and directly to the spirit. They saw no necessity to talk about or to intellectualize this natural capacity of theirs, for it was enough for them to put it in action and to know that they had it. Men's incapacity to link themselves directly to the spirit was what drove them to talk about the process of reaching knowledge, she stressed. They haven't stopped talking about it. And it is precisely this insistence on knowing how they strive toward the spirit, this insistence on analyzing the process, that gave them the certainty that being rational is a typically male skill. Esperanza explained that the conceptualization of reason has been done exclusively by men, and that this has allowed men to belittle women's gifts and accomplishments. And even worse, it has allowed men to exclude feminine traits from the formulation of the ideals of reason. By now, of course, women believe what has been defined for them, she emphasized. Women have been reared to believe that only men can be rational and coherent. By now, men carry with them a load of unearned assets that makes them automatically superior, regardless of their preparation or capacity. How did women lose their direct link to knowledge? I asked. Women haven't lost their connection, Esperanza corrected me. Women still have a direct link with the spirit. They have only forgotten how to use it. Or rather, they have copied men's condition of not having it at all. For thousands of years, men have struggled to make sure that women forget it. Take the Holy Inquisition, for example. That was a systematic purge to eradicate the belief that women have a direct link to the spirit. All organized religion is nothing but a very successful maneuver to put women in a lower place. Religions invoke a divine law that says that women are inferior. I stared at her in amazement, wondering to myself, how could she possibly be so erudite? Men's need to dominate others and women's lack of interest in expressing or formulating what they know and how they know it has been a most nefarious alliance. Esperanza went on. It has made it possible for women to be coerced from the moment they're born into accepting that fulfillment lies in homemaking, in love, in marriage, in having children, and in self-denial. Women have been excluded from the dominant forms of abstract thought and educated into dependence. They have been so thoroughly trained in the belief that men must think for them that women have finally given up thinking. Women are quite capable of thinking, I interrupted her. Women are capable of formulating what they have learned, Esperanza corrected me. And what they have learned has been defined by men. Men define the very nature of knowledge, and from it they have excluded that which pertains to the feminine. Or, if it is included, it is always in a negative light, and women have accepted this. You are years behind the times, I interjected. Nowadays, women can do anything they set their hearts to do. They pretty much have access to all the centers of learning and to almost any job that men can do. But this is meaningless as long as they don't have a support system, a support base, Esperanza argued. What good is it that they have access to what men have when they are all still considered inferior beings who have to adopt male attitudes and behaviors in order to succeed? The truly successful ones are the perfect converts. They too look down on women. According to men, the womb limits women both mentally and physically. This is the reason why women, although they have access to knowledge, have not been allowed to help determine what this knowledge is. Take, for instance, philosophers, Esperanza proposed. The pure thinkers. Some of them are viciously against women. Others are more subtle in what they are willing to admit that women might be as capable as men, were it not for the fact that women are not interested in rational pursuits. And if they are, they shouldn't be. For it is more becoming for a woman to be true to her nature, a nurturing, dependent companion of the male. Esperanza expressed all this with unquestionable authority. Within moments, however, I was assailed by doubts. If knowledge is but a male construct, then why your insistence that I go to school? I asked. Because you are a witch, and as such, you need to know what impinges on you and how it impinges on you, she replied. Before you refuse something, you must understand why you refuse it. You see, the problem is that knowledge in our days is derived purely from reasoning things out. But women have a different track, never, ever taken into consideration. That track can contribute to knowledge, but it would have to be a contribution that has nothing to do with reasoning things out. What would it deal with then? I asked. That's for you to decide after you master the tools of reasoning and understanding. I was very confused. What sorcerers propose, she explained, is that men can't have the exclusive right to reason. They seem to have it now because the ground where they apply reason is a ground where maleness prevails. Let's then apply reason to a ground where femaleness prevails. And that ground is, naturally, the inverted cone I described to you. Women's connection with the spirit itself. She tilted her head slightly to one side, considering what to say. That connection has to be faced with a different aspect of reasoning. An aspect never, ever used before. The feminine side of reasoning, she said. What is the feminine side of reason, Esperanza? Many things. One of them is definitely dreaming. She regarded me questioningly, but I had nothing to say. Her deep chuckle caught me by surprise. I know what you expect from sorcerers. You want rituals, incantations, odd, mysterious cults. You want to sing. You want to be one with nature. You want to commune with water spirits. You want paganism. Some romantic view of what sorcerers do. Very Germanic. To jump into the unknown, she went on, you need guts and mind. Only with them will you be able to explain to yourself and to others the treasures you might find. She leaned toward me, eager, it seemed, to confide something. She scratched her head and sneezed repeatedly, 5 times, as the caretaker had. You need to act on your magical side, she said. And what is that? The womb. She said this so distantly and calmly, as if she were not interested in my reaction, that I almost missed hearing it. Then suddenly, realizing the absurdity of her remark, I straightened up and looked at the others. The womb, Esperanza repeated. The womb is the ultimate feminine organ. It is the womb that gives women that extra edge, that extra force to channel their energy. She explained that men, in their quest for supremacy, have succeeded in reducing women's mysterious power, her womb, to a strictly biological organ, whose only function is to reproduce, to carry man's seed. As if obeying a cue, Nelida rose, walked around the table, and came to stand behind me. Do you know the story of the Annunciation? She whispered in my ear. Giggling, I turned to face her. I don't. In that same confidential whisper, she proceeded to tell me that in the Judeo-Christian tradition, men are the only ones who hear the voice of God. Women have been excluded from that privilege, with the exception of the Virgin Mary. Nelida said that an angel whispering to Mary was, of course, natural. What wasn't natural was the fact that all the angel had to say to Mary was that she would bear the Son of God. The womb did not receive knowledge, but rather the promise of God's seed. A male God who engendered another male God in turn. I wanted to think, to reflect on all that I had heard, but my mind was in a confused whirl. What about male sorcerers? I asked. They don't have a womb, yet they are clearly connected to the spirit. Esperanza regarded me with undisguised pleasure, then looked over her shoulder, as though she were afraid to be overheard, and whispered. Sorcerers are able to align themselves to intent, to the spirit, because they have given up what specifically defines their masculinity, and they are no longer males. Chapter 17. The manner in which Isidoro Baltazar was pacing about the room was different from the way he usually covered the length of his rectangular studio. Before, I had always been soothed by his pacing. This time, however, his steps rang with a disturbing, oddly menacing sound. The image of a tiger prowling in the bushes, not ready to pounce on a victim, but sensing that something was not quite right, came to mind. I turned away from my paper and was about to ask him what was the matter when he said, "We are going to Mexico." The way he said it made me laugh. The gruffness and seriousness of his voice warranted my joking question. "Are you going to marry me there?" Glaring at me, he came to an abrupt halt. "This is no joke," he snapped angrily. "This is the real thing." No sooner had he spoken than he smiled and shook his head. "What am I doing?" he said, making a humorous, helpless gesture. "I am angry at you, as if I had time for that. What a shame. The Nawal Juan Matus warned me that we are crap to the very end. He hugged me fiercely, as if I had been gone for a long time and had just returned. I don't think it's such a good idea for me to go to Mexico, I said. Cancel anything pending. There is no more time. He sounded like a military man giving orders. And I was in a festive mood. I couldn't help retorting. Jawohl, mein Gruppenführer. He lost his tightness and laughed. As we drove through Arizona, a most peculiar feeling suddenly flooded me. It was a bodily sensation, something like a chill that extended from my womb to my entire body and brought goosebumps all over my skin. The knowledge that something was wrong. There was in that feeling a new element I had not encountered before. Absolute certainty, without a tinge of being right or wrong. I just had an intuition. Something is wrong, I said, my voice rising against my will. Isadora Baltazar nodded, then said, in a matter-of-fact tone, "The sorcerers are leaving." When? My cry was quite involuntary. Maybe tomorrow or the next day, he replied, or perhaps a month from now, but their departure is imminent. Sighing in relief, I slumped on my seat and consciously relaxed. They have been saying that they're leaving since the day I met them, more than 3 years ago, I murmured, but I didn't really feel right about saying it. Isidoro Baltazar turned to glance at me, his face a mask of sheer contempt. I could see the effort he was making to erase his dissatisfaction. He smiled, then patted my knee and said softly, "In the sorcerer's world, we can't be that factual. If sorcerers repeat something to you until you're cynically bored with it, it is because they want to prepare you for it." He fixed me momentarily with his hard, unsmiling eyes and added, "Don't confuse their magical ways with your Dumbo ways." I nodded wordlessly. His statement didn't anger me. I was too scared for that. I kept quiet. The journey didn't take any time at all, or so it seemed to me. We took turns sleeping and driving, and by noon of the following day, we were at the witch's house. The instant the car's engine had been shut off, we both jumped out of the car, slammed the door shut, and ran up to the witch's house. "What's the idea?" the caretaker said. He was standing by the front door, seemingly bewildered by our abrupt and loud arrival. "Are you two fighting or chasing each other?" He looked at Isidora Baltazar and then at me. "Gee, running like this." "When are you leaving?" "When are you leaving?" I repeated, mechanically, unable to contain my growing anxiety and fear any longer. Laughing, the caretaker patted my back reassuringly and said, "I'm not going anyplace. You're not going to get rid of me that easily." His words sounded genuine enough, but they didn't relieve my anxiety. I searched his face, his eyes, to see if I could detect a lie. All I saw was kindness and sincerity. Upon realizing that Isidora Baltazar was no longer standing beside me, I tensed up again. He had vanished, as noiselessly and swiftly as a shadow. Seeing my agitation, the caretaker pointed with his chin to the house. I heard Isidoro Baltazar's voice, rising as if he were protesting, and then I heard his laughter. Is everybody here? I asked, trying to move past the caretaker. They are inside, he said, blocking my way with his outstretched arms. They can't see you at the moment. Seeing that I was about to protest, he added, they were not quite expecting you. They want me to talk to you before they do. He took my hand and led me away from the door. Let's go to the back and pick up some leaves, he proposed. We'll burn them and leave the ashes for the water fairies. Perhaps they'll turn them into gold. We didn't talk at all as we gathered pile after pile of leaves. But the physical activity, the sound of the rake scratching the ground, soothed me. It seemed we had been gathering and burning leaves for hours, when suddenly I knew that there was something else in the yard. I turned my head quickly and saw Florinda. Dressed in white pants and jacket, sitting on the bench under the zapote tree. She was like an apparition. Her face was shaded by a wide-brimmed straw hat, and in her hand she held a lace fan. She seemed not quite human, and so remote that I just stood motionless, absolutely amazed. Wondering whether she was going to acknowledge me, I took a few hesitant steps toward her. Upon noticing that she didn't in any way register my presence, I waited, undecided. It wasn't that I was trying to protect myself against being refused or being slighted by her. Rather, some undetermined, yet unconsciously understood rule kept me from demanding that she pay attention to me. However, when the caretaker joined Florinda on the bench, I reached for the rake propped against the tree and inched my way toward them. Grinning absent-mindedly, the caretaker looked up at me, but his attention was on what Florinda was saying. They spoke in a language I didn't understand, yet I listened to them, entranced. Whether it was the language or her affection for the old man, I didn't know, but her raspy voice was unusually soft and strange and hauntingly tender. Abruptly, she rose from the bench, as if she were propelled by some hidden spring. She zigzagged across the clearing like a hummingbird, pausing for an instant beside each tree, touching a leaf here and a blossom there. I raised my hand to call her attention, but I was distracted by a bright blue butterfly weaving blue shadows in the air. It flew toward me and alighted on my hand. The wide, quivering wings fanned out, and their shadow fell darkly over my fingers. It rubbed its head with its legs, and after opening and closing its wings several times, it took off again, leaving on my middle finger a ring in the shape of a triangular butterfly. Certain that it was an optical illusion, I shook my hand repeatedly. It's a trick, isn't it? I asked the caretaker in a shaky voice. It's an optical illusion. The caretaker shook his head, and his face crinkled into a most radiant smile. It's a lovely ring, he said, holding my hand in his. It's a magnificent gift. A gift? I repeated. I had the briefest flash of insight, but it disappeared, leaving me lost and bewildered. "Who put the ring on my finger?" I asked, staring at the jewel. The antenna and the thin, elongated body dividing the triangle were fashioned in white gold, filigree, and were studded with tiny diamonds. "Didn't you notice the ring before?" the caretaker said. "Before?" I repeated, baffled. "Before what?" "You've been wearing that ring since Florinda gave it to you," he replied. "But when?" I asked, then held my hand over my mouth to stifle my shock. "I can't remember Florinda giving me the ring." I mumbled more to myself than to him. "And why haven't I noticed the ring before?" The caretaker shrugged, at a loss to explain my oversight, then suggested that perhaps I hadn't noticed the ring because it fits so perfectly on my finger. He seemed about to say something else, but stopped himself, and instead suggested that we pick up some more leaves. "I can't," I said. "I have to talk to Florinda." "You do?" he mused, in the manner of one hearing a ridiculous and probably unsound idea. But he didn't persuade me to the contrary. "She's gone for her walk," he explained, pointing with his chin toward the path that led to the hills. "I'll catch up with her," I stated. I could see her white-clad figure weaving in and out of the high chaparral in the distance. "She goes far," the caretaker warned me. "That's no problem," I assured him. I ran after Florinda, then slowed down before I caught up with her. She had the most beautiful walk. She moved with a vigorous, athletic motion, effortlessly, her back erect. Sensing my presence, she came to an abrupt halt, then turned and held out her hand in a gesture of greeting. "How are you, darling?" she said, gazing at me. Her raspy voice was light and clear and very soft. In my eagerness to learn about the ring, I didn't even greet her properly. Stumbling over my words, I asked her if she had put the ring on my finger. "Is it mine now?" I said. "Yes," she said. "It's yours by right." There was something in her tone, a sense of certainty that both thrilled and terrified me. Yet it didn't even occur to me to refuse the no doubt expensive gift. "Does the ring have magical powers?" I asked, holding up my hand against the light so that each stone sparkled with a dazzling radiance. "No," she laughed. "It doesn't have powers of any sort. It is a special ring, though. Not because of its value or because it belonged to me, but because the person who made this ring was an extraordinary Nawal." "Was he a jeweler?" I inquired. "Was he the same person who built the odd-looking figures in the caretaker's room?" "The same one," she replied. "He wasn't a jeweler, though. He wasn't a sculptor either. The mere thought that he might be considered an artist made him laugh. Yet anyone who saw his work couldn't help but see that only an artist could have executed the extraordinary things he did." Florinda moved a few steps away from me and let her eyes roam across the hills, as if she were searching for memories in the distance. Then she turned once more toward me and in a barely audible whisper said that whatever this Nawal made, whether it was a ring, a brick wall, tiles for the floor, the mysterious inventions, or simply a cardboard box, it invariably turned out to be an exquisite piece. Not only in terms of its superb craftsmanship, but because it was imbued with something ineffable. If such an extraordinary individual made this ring, then it has to have some kind of power, I insisted. The ring in itself has no power, regardless of who made it, Florinda assured me. The power was in the making. The Nawal who made this ring was aligned so thoroughly with what sorcerers call intent that he was able to produce this lovely jewel without him being a jeweler. The ring was an act of pure intent. Reluctant to sound stupid, I didn't dare admit that I had no inkling what she meant by intent. So I asked her what had prompted her to make me such a marvelous gift. I don't think I deserve it, I added. You will use this ring to align yourself with intent, she said. A wicked grin spread across her face as she added, but of course you already know about aligning yourself with intent. I know nothing of the sort, I mumbled defensively, then confessed that I didn't really know what intent was. You might not know what the word means, she said offhandedly, but something in you intuits how to tap that force. She brought her head close to mine and whispered that I had always used intent to move from dream to reality, or to bring my dream, whatever it might have been, to reality. She glanced at me expectantly, waiting no doubt for me to draw the obvious conclusions. Seeing my uncomprehending expression, she added, both the inventions in the caretaker's room and the ring were made in dreams. I still don't get it, I complained. The inventions frighten you, she said equably, and the ring delights you. Since both are dreams, it can easily be the reverse. You frighten me, Florinda. What do you mean? This, dear, is a world of dreams. We are teaching you how to bring them about all by yourself. Her dark, shiny eyes held mine for a moment, and then she added, at the moment, all the sorcerers of the Nawal, Mariano Aureliano's party, help you enter into this world and are helping you to stay in it now. Is it a different world? Or is it that I am a different myself? You're the same, but in a different world. She was silent for a moment, then conceded that I had more energy than before. Energy that comes from your savings and from the loan all of us made you. Her banking metaphor was very clear to me. What I still didn't grasp was what she meant by a different world. Look around you, she exclaimed, holding her arms out wide. This is not the world of everyday life. She was silent for a long time. Then, in a voice that was but a low, gentle murmur, added, Can butterflies turn into rings in the world of daily affairs? In a world that has been safely and rigorously structured by the roles assigned to all of us? I had no answer. I looked around me, at the trees, at the bushes, at the distant mountains. Whatever she meant by a different world still eluded me. The difference had to be a purely subjective one, was the thought that finally occurred to me. It isn't, Florinda insisted, reading my thoughts. This is a sorcerer's dream. You got into it because you have the energy. And said, there's really no way to teach dreaming to women. All that can be done is to prop them up so as to make them realize the enormous potential they carry in their organic disposition. Since dreaming for a woman is a matter of having energy at her disposal, the important thing is to convince her of the need to modify her deep socialization in order to acquire that energy. The act of making use of this energy is automatic. Women dream sorcerers' dreams the instant they have the energy. She confided that a serious consideration about sorcerers' dreams, stemming from her own shortcomings, was the difficulty of imbuing women with the courage to break new ground. Most women, and she said she was one of them, prefer their safe shackles to the terror of the new. Dreaming is only for courageous women, she whispered in my ear. Then she burst into loud laughter and added, or for those women who have no other choice, because their circumstances are unbearable, a category to which most women belong without even knowing it. The sound of her raspy laughter had an odd effect on me. I felt as if I had suddenly awakened from a deep sleep and remembered something quite forgotten while I had slept. Isidoro Baltazar told me about your imminent departure. When are you leaving? I am not going anywhere yet. Her voice was firm, but it rang with a devastating sadness. Your dreaming teacher and I are staying behind. The rest are leaving. I didn't quite understand what she meant, and to hide my confusion, I made a joking comment. My dreaming teacher, Zulika, hasn't said a single word to me in 3 years. In fact, she has never even talked to me. You and Esperanza are the only ones who have really guided me and taught me. Florinda's gales of laughter reverberated around us, a joyous sound that brought me intense relief. And yet I felt puzzled. Explain something to me, Florinda, I began. When did you give me this ring? How come I went from picking leaves with the caretaker to having this ring? Florinda's face was full of enjoyment as she explained that it could easily be said that picking leaves is one of the doors into a sorcerer's dream, provided one has enough energy to cross that threshold. She took my hand in hers and added, I gave you the ring while you were crossing. Therefore, your mind didn't record the act. Suddenly, when you were already in the dream, you discovered the ring on your finger. I looked at her curiously. There was something in her elucidation I couldn't grasp. Something so vague, so indistinct. "Let's return to the house," she suggested, "and recross that threshold. Perhaps you'll be aware of it this time." Leisurely, we retracted our steps, approaching the house from the back. I walked a few steps ahead of Florinda, so I could be perfectly aware of everything. I peered at the trees, the tiles, the walls, eager to detect the change or anything that might give me a clue to the transition. I didn't notice anything, except that the caretaker was no longer there. I turned around to tell Florinda that I most definitely had missed the transition, but she was not behind me. She was nowhere in sight. She was gone and had left me all alone there. I walked into the house. It was, as had happened to me before, deserted. This feeling of aloneness no longer frightened me, no longer gave me the sensation I had been abandoned. Automatically, I went to the kitchen and ate the chicken tamales that had been left in a basket. Then I went to my hammock and tried to put my thoughts in order. I woke up and found myself lying on a cot in a small dark room. I looked desperately about me, searching for some inkling of what was going on. I sat bolt upright as I saw big, moving shadows lurking by the door. Eager to find out whether the door was open and the shadows were inside, I reached under the cot for the chamber pot, which somehow I knew to be there, and threw it at the shadows. The pot landed outside with an excessively loud clatter. The shadows vanished. Wondering whether I had simply imagined them, I went outside. Undecided, I stared at the tall mesquite fence encircling the clearing, and then I knew in a flash where I was. I was standing in back of the small house. All this went through my mind as I searched for the chamber pot, which had rolled all the way to the fence. As I bent to pick it up, I saw a coyote squeeze through the mesquite fence. Automatically, I threw the pot at the animal, but it hit a rock instead. Indifferent to the loud bang and to my presence, the coyote crossed the clearing. It turned its head audaciously several times to look at me. Its fur shimmered like silver. Its bushy tail swept over the various rocks like a magic wand. Each rock it touched came to life. The rocks hopped about with shiny eyes and moved their lips, asking peculiar questions in voices too faint to be heard. I screamed. The rocks moved appallingly fast toward me. I immediately knew that I was dreaming. This is one of my usual nightmares, I mumbled to myself, with monsters and fear and everything else. Convinced that once I had recognized and voiced the problem, I had neutralized its effects on me. I was about to give in and settle down to live a nightmare's terror when I heard a voice say, "Test the track of dreams." I wheeled around. Esperanza was standing under the ramada, tending to a fire, on a raised platform made of cane, heavily coated with mud. She looked strange and remote in the gleaming, moving light of the fire, as if she were separated from me by a distance that had nothing to do with space. "Don't be frightened," she ordered. Then she lowered her voice to a murmur and said, "We all share one another's dreams, but now you are not dreaming." Doubt must have been written all over my face. "Believe me, you are not dreaming," she assured me. I stepped a bit closer. Not only did her voice sound unfamiliar, but she herself was different. From where I was standing, she was Esperanza. Nonetheless, she looked like Zulika. I moved very close to her. She was Zulika, young and strong and very beautiful. She couldn't have been more than 40 years old. Her oval face was framed by curly black hair that was turning gray. Hers was a smooth, pale face, highlighted by liquid dark eyes set wide apart. Her gaze was indrawn, enigmatic, and very pure. Her short, thin upper lip hinted at severeness, while the full, almost voluptuous lower lip gave an indication of gentleness and also passion. Fascinated by the change in her, I simply stared at her, enthralled. I definitely must be dreaming, I thought. Her clear laughter made me realize that she had read my thoughts. She took my hand in hers and said softly, "You're not dreaming, my dear. This is the real me. I am your dreaming teacher. I am Zulika. Esperanza is my other self. Sorcerers call it the dreaming body." My heart thumped so violently it made my chest ache. I almost choked with anxiety and excitement. I tried to pull my hand away, but she was holding me with a firm grip that I couldn't break. I pressed my eyes tightly shut. More than anything, I wanted her to be gone when I opened them again. She was there, of course, her lips parted in a radiant smile. I closed my eyes again, then jumped up and down and stomped on the ground as if I had gone berserk. With my free hand, I slapped my face repeatedly until it burned with pain. All to no avail. I couldn't wake up. Every time I opened my eyes, she was there. "I think you've got enough," she laughed, and I commanded her to hit me. She readily obliged, striking 2 sharp blows on my upper arms with a long, hard walking stick. "It's no use, dear." She spoke slowly, as if she were very tired. She took a deep breath and let go of my hand. Then she spoke again. "You're not dreaming, and I am Zulika. But when I dream, I am Esperanza, and something else too. But I'm not going to go into that now." I wanted to say something, anything, but I couldn't speak. My tongue was paralyzed, and all I managed to produce was a whimpering, dog-like sound. I tried to relax with breathing I had learned in a yoga class. She chuckled, seemingly taken with my antics. It was a reassuring sound that had a soothing effect on me. It radiated so much warmth, such deep confidence, that my body relaxed instantaneously. "You're a stalker," she proceeded, "and you belong, by all rights, to Florinda." Her tone brooked no argument, no contradiction. "You're also a somnambulist and a great natural dreamer. And by virtue of your ability, you also belong to me." One side of me wanted to laugh out loud and tell her that she was raving mad. But another side was in complete agreement with her claim. "By which name do you want me to call you?" I asked hesitantly. "By which name?" she repeated, gazing at me as if it should have been self-evident. "I'm Zulika. What do you think this is? A game? We don't play games here." Taken aback by her vehemence, I could only mumble, "No, I don't think this is a game." "When I dream, I am Esperanza," she continued, her voice sharp with intensity. Her face was stern but radiant, open without pity, all at the same time. "When I don't dream, I am Zulika. But whether I am Zulika or Esperanza or anything else, it shouldn't matter to you. I am still your dreaming teacher." All I could do was nod idiotically. Even if I had had something to say, I wouldn't have been able to do so. A cold, clammy sweat of fear ran down my sides. My bowels were loose, and my bladder about to burst. I wanted to go to the bathroom and relieve myself and puke. I finally couldn't hold it any longer. It was a matter of disgracing myself right there or running to the outhouse. I had enough energy to opt for the latter. Zulika's laughter was the laughter of a young girl. It followed me all the way to the outhouse. When I returned to the clearing, she urged me to sit beside her on the nearby bench. I automatically obeyed her and sat down heavily on the edge, nervously putting my hands over my closed knees. There was an undeniable gleam of hardness, but also of kindness in her eyes. It came to me in a flash, as if I had known it before, that her ruthlessness was more than anything else an inner discipline. Her relentless self-control had stamped her whole being with a most appealing elusiveness and secretiveness. Not the secretness of covert and furtive behavior, but the secretiveness of the mysterious, the unknown. That was the reason I followed her around whenever I saw her, like a puppy dog. "You've had 2 transitions today," Zulika explained. "One from being normally awake to dreaming awake, and the other from dreaming awake to being normally awake. The first was smooth and unnoticeable. The second was nightmarish. That's the normal state of affairs. All of us experience those transitions just like that." I forced a smile. "But I still don't know what I did," I said. "I'm not aware of any steps. Things just happen to me. And I find myself in a dream without knowing how I got there." There was a glint in her eyes. "What is ordinarily done," she said, "is to start dreaming by sleeping in a hammock or in some kind of a strapping contraption hanging from a roof beam or a tree. Suspended in that fashion, we don't have any contact with the ground. The ground grounds us. Remember that. In that suspended position, a beginning dreamer can learn how energy shifts from being awake to dreaming, and from dreaming a dream to dreaming awake. All this, as Florinda already told you, is a matter of energy. The moment you have it, off you go. Your problem now is going to be whether you'll be able to save enough energy yourself, since the sorcerers won't be able to lend it to you anymore. Zulika raised her brows in an exaggerated manner and added, "We'll see. I'll try to remind you the next time we share one another's dreams." Seeing the dismay on my face, she laughed with childlike abandon. "How do we share one another's dreams?" I asked, gazing into her astonishing eyes. They were dark and shiny, with beams of light radiating from the pupils. Instead of answering, Zulika dropped a few more sticks into the fire. Embers burst and spilled, and the light grew brighter. For an instant, she stood still, her eyes fixed on the flames, as if she were gathering in the light. She turned sharply and glanced briefly at me, then squatted and wrapped her strong, muscular arms around her shins. Looking into the darkness, listening to the crackling fire, she rocked from side to side. "How do we share one another's dreams?" I asked again. Zulika stopped rocking. She shook her head, then looked up, startled, as if suddenly awakened. "That's something impossible for me to explain now," she stated. "Dreaming is incomprehensible. One has to feel it, not discuss it. As in the everyday world, before one explains something and analyzes it, one has to experience it." She spoke slowly and deliberately. She admitted that it was important to explain as one went along. Yet, explanations sometimes are premature. This is one of those times. "One day it will all make sense to you," Zulika promised, seeing the disappointment in my face. With a quick, light motion, she rose to her feet and went to stare at the flames, as if her eyes needed to feed on the light. Her shadow, thrown by the fire, grew enormous against the wall and the ceiling of the ramada. Without so much as a nod, she turned with a sweep of her long skirt and disappeared inside the house. Unable to move, I stood rooted to the spot. I could barely breathe as the clatter of her sandals grew fainter and fainter. "Don't leave me here," I yelled in a panic-stricken voice. "There are things I need to know." Zulika materialized by the door instantly. "What do you need to know?" she asked in a detached, almost distracted tone. "I'm sorry," I gabbled, glancing into her shiny eyes. I examined her, almost hypnotized. "I didn't mean to shout. I added apologetically. I thought you had gone into one of the rooms. I looked at her beseechingly, hoping she would explain something to me. She didn't. All she did was ask me again what it was I wanted to know. Would you talk to me when I see you again? I blurted out the first thing that came into my head, afraid she would leave if I didn't keep on talking. When I see you again, we won't be in the same world as before, she said. Who knows what we'll do there? But a while ago, I insisted. You yourself told me you are my dreaming teacher. Don't leave me in the darkness. Explain things to me. The torment I experience is more than I can bear. I am split. You are, she admitted casually. You certainly are split. She looked at me, her eyes brimming with kindness. But that's only because you don't let go of your old ways. You're a good dreamer. Somnambulist brains have formidable potential. That is, if you would cultivate your character. I hardly heard what she said. I tried to put my thoughts in order, but I couldn't. A succession of images of events I didn't quite remember went through my mind with incredible speed. My will exercised no control upon their order or their nature. Those images were transformed into sensations that, however precise, refused to be defined, refused to be formulated into words, even into thoughts. Obviously aware of my incapacity, Zulika's face lit up in an expansive grin. We have all helped the Nawal Mariano Aureliano to push you into the second attention all along, she said slowly and softly. In there, we find fluency and continuity, as we do in the world of everyday life. In both states, the practical is dominant. We act efficiently in both states. What we can't do in the second attention, however, is to break what we experience into pieces so we can handle it, so we can feel secure, so we can understand it. While she talked, I was thinking to myself, she's wasting her time telling me all this. Doesn't she know that I am too stupid to understand her explanations? But she continued to speak, smiling broadly, obviously knowing that for me to admit that I was not too bright meant that I had changed somehow. Otherwise, I would never admit such a notion, even to myself. In the second attention, she continued, or as I prefer to call it, when dreaming awake, one has to believe that the dream is as real as the everyday world. In other words, one has to acquiesce. For sorcerers, all worldly or otherworldly pursuits are ruled by irreproachable acts. And in back of all irreproachable acts lies acquiescence. And acquiescence is not acceptance. Acquiescence involves a dynamic element. It involves action. Her voice was very soft, and there was a feverish gleam in her eyes as she finished. The moment one begins dreaming awake, a world of enticing, unexplored possibilities opens up. A world where the ultimate audacity becomes a reality, where the unexpected is expected. That's the time when man's definitive adventure begins. The world becomes limitless with possibilities and wonder. Zulika was silent for a long time. She seemed to be debating what else to say. With the help of the Nawal Mariano Aureliano, you once even saw the glow of the serum. She began, and her soft voice, turning wistful, became softer still. Magical creatures that exist only in Indian legends. The serum are beings that sorcerers can see only while dreaming awake at the deepest level. They are beings from another world. They glow like phosphorescent human beings. She wished me good night, turned, and disappeared inside the house. For a second I stood, numbed. Then I dashed after her. Before I reached the threshold, I heard Florinda behind me say, "Don't follow her." Florinda's presence was so unexpected that I had to lean against the wall and wait for my heartbeat to return to normal. "Come and keep me company," Florinda said. She was sitting on the bench, feeding the fire. The elusive light in her eyes, the ghostly whiteness of her hair, was more like a memory than a vision. I stretched out on the bench beside her, and, as if it were the most natural thing to do, I placed my head in her lap. Never follow Zulika, or any one of us for that matter, unless you're asked to do so, Florinda said, combing her fingers through my hair. As you now know, Zulika isn't what she appears to be. She's always more, much more than that. Never try to figure her out, because when you think you have covered all the possibilities, she'll flatten you out by being more than you can imagine in your wildest fantasies. I know, I sighed contentedly. I could feel the tension draining from my face. I could feel it leaving my body. Zulika is a serum from the Bacatete Mountains, I said with absolute conviction. I've known about these creatures all along. Seeing the astonishment in Florinda's face, I went on daringly. Zulika wasn't born like an ordinary human being. She was established. She's sorcery itself. No, Florinda contradicted me emphatically. Zulika was born. Esperanza wasn't. She smiled down into my face and added, "This should be a worthy riddle for you." "I think I understand," I murmured. "But I am too insensitive and can't formulate what I understand." "You're doing fine," she chuckled softly. "Being as insensitive as you normally are, you must wait until you are really, really awake. 100% in order to understand. Now you are only 50% awake. The trick is to remain in heightened awareness. In heightened awareness, nothing is impossible to comprehend for us. Feeling that I was about to interrupt her, she covered my lips with her hand and added, "Don't think about it now. Always remember that you're compulsive, even in heightened awareness, and your thinking is not thorough." I heard someone moving in the shadows behind the bushes. "Who is there?" I asked, sitting up. I looked all around me, but I couldn't see anyone. Women's laughter echoed across the yard. "You can't see them," Florinda said sleepily. "And why are they hiding from me?" I asked. Florinda smiled. "They are not hiding from you," she explained. "It's just that you can't see them without the Nahual, Mariano Aureliano's help." I didn't know what to say to that. On one level, it made perfect sense, yet I found myself shaking my head. "Can you help me see them?" Florinda nodded. "But your eyes are tired. They are tired from seeing too much. You need to sleep." Purposefully, I kept my eyes wide open, afraid to miss whoever was going to come out of the bushes the moment my attention slackened. I stared at the leaves and the shadows, no longer knowing which was which, until I fell into a deep, dreamless sleep.